The iron wheels of the train screeched against the rails as it pulled into Silver Creek, Colorado, on a sweltering summer afternoon in 1875. Perspiration trickled down Priscilla Donahue's neck, dampening the high collar of her travel dress as she clutched her weathered carpet bag with trembling fingers. She'd traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, carrying nothing but a crumpled letter of agreement, a small photograph, and the weight of her past etched permanently across her skin. The conductor called out their arrival, and Priscilla hesitated before stepping onto the wooden platform. The small mining town sprawled before her, nothing like the bustling streets of Boston she'd left behind. Wooden buildings lined the dusty main street, their facades bleached by the relentless Colorado sun. A handful of curious onlookers had gathered to watch the newcomers disembark, and Priscilla instinctively raised her hand to the left side of her face, making sure her hair remained properly arranged to conceal what lay beneath. She scanned the platform anxiously, searching for the man who'd responded to her advertisement in the matrimonial news 3 months prior. Theodore Zale had described himself as a cattle rancher of modest means seeking a practical wife to share his home. His letters had been straightforward but kind, mentioning nothing of romance but promising respect and partnership. It had been enough for Priscilla, whose options in Boston had dwindled to nothing after the fire that had claimed her parents' lives and marked her forever. A tall figure pushed through the small crowd, and Priscilla recognized him immediately from the daguerreotype she'd carried across the country. Theodore Zale was broader in person, his shoulders squared beneath a practical cotton shirt, a worn leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded penetrating blue eyes. His face was weathered from the sun, with a strong jawline softened slightly by a neatly trimmed beard the color of wheat. As their eyes met across the platform, Priscilla attempted a hesitant smile. For a moment, Theodore's expression remained unreadable as he approached, removing his hat in a gesture of politeness. "Miss Donahue?" he asked, his voice deeper than she'd imagined from his letters. "Yes, Mr. Zale. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Priscilla extended her gloved hand, hoping he wouldn't notice how it trembled. Theodore took her hand briefly, his calloused palm rough against her fine gloves. "Welcome to Silver Creek. I trust your journey was comfortable." "As comfortable as could be expected," she replied, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must appear after days of travel. Theodore nodded, then gestured toward a wagon waiting nearby. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. I've brought the wagon to transport your belongings." As he reached for her carpet bag, a sudden gust of wind swept across the platform, catching Priscilla's carefully arranged hair and displacing it before she could react. She gasped, quickly raising her hand to cover the left side of her face, but she knew from the way Theodore's eyes widened that he'd seen the angry red scars that crawled from her jawline up past her temple, disappearing into her hairline. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken words. Theodore's hand remained extended toward her bag, frozen in mid-air. "Your letter didn't mention." He began, then stopped himself, his jaw tightening. "No, it didn't," Priscilla acknowledged, her voice barely audible above the hissing steam of the train. She fought to keep her dignity intact as she continued. "I understand if you wish to reconsider our arrangement, Mr. Zale." Theodore's expression had closed off, becoming unreadable as he finally took her bag. "Let's get your trunk loaded. We should reach the ranch before sunset." The ride to Theodore's ranch passed in uncomfortable silence. Priscilla sat rigidly beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap as she stared at the rugged landscape. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. Closer, golden plains rolled in gentle waves, punctuated by clusters of pine and aspen trees. Under different circumstances, she might have found the scenery beautiful. "How long have you lived in Silver Creek?" she finally asked, unable to bear the silence any longer. Theodore glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. 8 years. Came out after the war with what little I had and built the ranch from nothing. You fought in the war between the states, Union cavalry. Spent 3 years in the saddle before taking a Confederate bullet near Petersburg. His tone made it clear he didn't wish to elaborate further. As the wagon crested a hill, Priscilla caught her first glimpse of what was to be her new home. The ranch house was modest but solid, a 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A large barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. In the distance, cattle grazed in fenced pastures that stretched toward the horizon. "It's not much," Theodore said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment, "but it's paid for and the land's good." "It looks wonderful," Priscilla replied honestly. After the cramped boarding house room she'd rented in Boston, the open space and solidity of the ranch was appealing. As they approached, a young boy of about 12 dashed from the barn to meet them, his face lighting up at the sight of the wagon. "That's Billy," Theodore explained. "Orphaned in a Cheyenne raid 3 years back. I took him in. He helps around the ranch." The boy reached them as Theodore brought the wagon to a halt, his curious gaze immediately fixing on Priscilla. "Billy, this is Miss Donahue from Boston," Theodore said, climbing down from the wagon. "Is she your wife now, Mr. Zale?" the boy asked bluntly. Theodore's jaw tightened. "Miss Donahue has just arrived. Go tell Mrs. Wilkins to set another place for supper." As Billy ran toward the house, Theodore moved to help Priscilla down from the wagon. She accepted his outstretched hand, careful to turn her unscarred side toward him. "Who is Mrs. Wilkins?" she inquired as her feet touched the ground. "Housekeeper. Widow from town who comes 3 times a week to cook and clean." He paused, then added, "I figured having her here today might make things more proper, until we determine our arrangement." The unspoken implication hung in the air between them. "Until we determine if there will be a wedding after all." Priscilla straightened her shoulders. "I appreciate your consideration, Mr. Zale." Theodore led her inside, where she was introduced to Mrs. Wilkins, a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes who showed her to a small but clean bedroom on the 2nd floor. "You must be exhausted, dear," the older woman said sympathetically. "Why don't you rest before supper? I've left water for washing up." Left alone, Priscilla sank onto the edge of the narrow bed, finally allowing her careful composure to crack. She'd seen the shock in Theodore's eyes when he'd glimpsed her scars, followed by that carefully blank expression. It was a reaction she'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 years, the initial horror, then the polite distance. She moved to the small mirror hanging on the wall, brushing her chestnut hair aside to fully expose what she usually kept hidden. The firelight had not been merciful. Beginning just below her left ear, angry red welts twisted up her cheek, pulling at the corner of her eye and continuing across her temple. The night she dragged her unconscious father from their burning home, a falling beam had caught her, searing her flesh and forever marking her as damaged. Priscilla had no illusions about beauty. Before the fire, she'd been considered pretty enough, with her wide brown eyes and heart-shaped face. Pretty enough that her parents had expected a good match for their only daughter. Now, at 26, she was grateful merely for the chance at a practical partnership, a home far from the pitying glances of those who had known her before. But even that modest hope seemed to be slipping away. She'd been foolish not to mention her scars in her letters, but she'd feared that no man would agree to marry her if he knew. Now she would likely face the journey back to Boston alone, with what little remained of her savings. Squaring her shoulders, she washed her face and hands in the basin provided, changed into her second-best dress, and repinned her hair to partially conceal her scars. Whatever Theodore Zale's decision, she would face it with dignity. Supper was a strained affair. Billy chattered excitedly, peppering Priscilla with questions about Boston and the train journey, while Mrs. Wilkins attempted to maintain polite conversation. Theodore said little, though Priscilla occasionally caught him studying her when he thought she wouldn't notice. After the meal, Mrs. Wilkins prepared to leave, gathering her shawl and basket. "Will you be returning tomorrow?" Priscilla asked, suddenly anxious at the thought of being alone with Theodore and the boy. The housekeeper glanced uncertainly at Theodore before responding. "I normally come Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but I could certainly—" "That won't be necessary," Theodore interrupted. "Miss Donahue and I need to discuss certain matters. I'll bring you home, Mrs. Wilkins." Once they were alone, Priscilla helped Billy clear the table, grateful for the simple task to occupy her hands. "Are your scars from Indians?" the boy asked suddenly with a child's directness. Priscilla nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "No, Billy, there was a fire." "Oh." He considered this. "My pa had a big scar on his arm from a bear. He said scars just meant you were tough enough to survive something bad." A lump formed in Priscilla's throat at the boy's simple wisdom. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Billy agreed solemnly. "Mr. Zale says so too." They finished the dishes in companionable silence, and by the time Theodore returned, Billy had shown Priscilla where everything belonged in the kitchen and was enthusiastically describing life on the ranch. "Time for bed, Billy," Theodore said as he hung his hat on a peg by the door. The boy protested briefly, but eventually bid Priscilla good night and headed upstairs, leaving her alone with Theodore in the lamplight of the kitchen. "Would you prefer to speak in the parlor?" she asked, feeling suddenly awkward. Theodore shook his head. "Kitchen's fine." He pulled out a chair at the table, gesturing for her to sit before taking his own seat across from her. For a long moment he studied her, his blue eyes inscrutable in the lamplight. Priscilla forced herself not to flinch under his scrutiny or turn her scarred side away. "You should have told me," he finally said, his voice neither angry nor accusatory, merely stating a fact. "Would you have responded to my advertisement if I had?" she countered quietly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Honesty matters out here, Miss Donahue. A man's word or a woman's is sometimes all we have." "I apologize for the deception," Priscilla said, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "I'll understand if you wish to dissolve our agreement." Theodore leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "The stage back to Denver doesn't leave until Thursday." "I see." The disappointment was sharper than she'd anticipated. "Until then," he continued, "you're welcome to stay here. I can make up a pallet in Billy's room and give you my bedroom." "That won't be necessary," Priscilla assured him, desperate to maintain some dignity. "The room Mrs. Wilkins showed me will be perfectly adequate for a few days." Theodore nodded, seemingly relieved. "I've got 60 head of cattle to move to the north pasture tomorrow. Billy and I will be gone most of the day." "I understand." He stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "I'll show you where Mrs. Wilkins keeps the supplies. You can help yourself to whatever you need." As Priscilla lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Colorado night, she fought back tears of frustration. She'd risked everything on this journey, spent nearly all her savings on the train ticket and trousseau, only to face rejection once again. What would become of her when she returned to Boston? The boarding house where she'd lived had already rented her room to someone else. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of faceless men turning away from her in horror, of endless train journeys leading nowhere. Morning came early on the ranch, with rooster crows and the sounds of Theodore moving about downstairs. By the time Priscilla had dressed and made her way to the kitchen, Billy and Theodore had already eaten and were preparing to leave. "There's coffee on the stove and biscuits in the warming oven," Theodore said, barely glancing at her as he gathered his saddlebags. "We won't be back till sundown." "I'll have supper waiting," Priscilla replied automatically, then bit her lip, remembering that she wasn't his wife, merely an unwanted guest. Something flickered in Theodore's eyes' surprise, perhaps before he nodded curtly and headed out the door, Billy trailing behind him with a cheerful wave. Alone in the ranch house, Priscilla took stock of her surroundings. The kitchen was well organized but showed signs of bachelor living: mismatched dishes, practical but plain furnishings. The parlor contained a sturdy sofa, 2 chairs and bookshelves filled with an eclectic collection of volumes ranging from practical farming manuals to poetry. A battered copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass caught her eye, its pages dog-eared and well-thumbed. Rather than dwelling on her uncertain future, Priscilla decided to make herself useful. She spent the morning cleaning, finding comfort in the familiar tasks. The afternoon was devoted to baking bread and preparing a stew for supper, using the supplies Mrs. Wilkins had left. She was gathering eggs from the henhouse when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Expecting Theodore and Billy, she was surprised to see a woman riding toward the house, her blonde hair gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The stranger dismounted gracefully, tethering her horse to the porch rail before noticing Priscilla by the henhouse. "Hello there," the woman called, approaching with a friendly smile. She was strikingly beautiful, with golden curls framing a perfect complexion. "You must be Mr. Zale's bride from back east. I'm Sophia Marshall, neighbor from the next ranch over." Priscilla self-consciously tucked her hair to better cover her scars before extending her hand. "Priscilla Donahue, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Marshall." "Miss Marshall," the woman corrected with a laugh, "though not for lack of trying on my father's part. He's been attempting to marry me off to eligible ranchers since I turned 18. She studied Priscilla with open curiosity. Theodore never mentioned he'd sent for a bride. "How long have you been corresponding?" "A few months," Priscilla replied cautiously, uncertain how much Theodore would want revealed about their arrangement. "Well, I must say, you're not what I expected for Theodore Zale," Sophia remarked, her gaze lingering on Priscilla's half-concealed scars. "He's turned down half the eligible women in the county, including me." She laughed lightly, taking any potential sting from her words. "Father was quite put out. The Zale Ranch adjoins our property, and a marriage would have combined 2 of the largest spreads in the county." Priscilla wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply asked, "Would you like to come inside for some tea?" "Oh, I can't stay," Sophia said. "I just rode over to invite you both to supper tomorrow. Father insists on meeting Theodore's bride." "That's very kind, but we'll expect you around 6, Sophia continued, already moving back toward her horse. "The Marshall Ranch is just over the East Ridge, can't miss it. Father's built the biggest house in the county." With a cheerful wave, she mounted and rode off, leaving Priscilla staring after her in dismay. How could she explain to the Marshalls that she wasn't Theodore's bride after all? The thought of facing more pitying looks and whispers about her scars made her stomach clench. Theodore and Billy returned at dusk, tired and dusty from their day's work. The aroma of fresh bread and stew filled the kitchen, and Billy's eyes lit up as he entered. "You made supper," he exclaimed, as if it were a remarkable feat. "I thought you might be hungry after your work," Priscilla replied, setting bowls on the table. Theodore hung his hat on the peg by the door, regarding the domestic scene with an unreadable expression. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Priscilla said simply. "It gave me something to occupy my time." They ate in relative silence, broken only by Billy's enthusiastic description of the cattle drive and his proud recounting of how Theodore had let him help with the branding. "Miss Marshall came by today," Priscilla mentioned as she cleared the dishes. "She's invited us to supper tomorrow evening at her father's ranch." Theodore's expression darkened. "Did she now?" She seemed to believe that that we had already. Priscilla faltered, a blush rising to her cheeks. "Sophia Marshall has a habit of meddling where she's not wanted," Theodore said tersely. "I'll ride over tomorrow and decline." "But won't that seem odd?" Priscilla pressed. "She mentioned that her father was eager to meet your bride." "You're not my bride," Theodore pointed out bluntly. The words shouldn't have hurt. They were merely a statement of fact, but Priscilla felt their sting nonetheless. "Of course, I just thought it might be awkward to explain." Theodore studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "I suppose we could go. It's just one evening." "Will you tell them about our situation?" "No need to make things more complicated," he decided. "We'll attend supper, be polite, and leave it at that. You'll be gone by Thursday anyway." The reminder of her imminent departure hung in the air between them, as Theodore excused himself to check on the stock before turning in. Later that night, unable to sleep, Priscilla made her way downstairs for a glass of water. As she passed the parlor, she noticed a light still burning and found Theodore seated in one of the chairs, reading by lamplight. He looked up at her entrance, closing his book. "Can't sleep." "The night sounds are different here," she admitted. "In Boston, it was always carriages and voices. Here it's so quiet, except for the wind and the coyotes." "You get used to it," Theodore said, then seemed to realize the futility of his comment. "Or you would, I suppose, if you were staying." Priscilla nodded, turning to leave, but Theodore's voice stopped her. "How did it happen?" "Your scars." She stiffened, her hand automatically rising to the left side of her face. "There was a fire. 2 years ago. Our home in Boston burned in the night. Your family, my parents, didn't survive. I managed to drag my father partway out before a beam fell. The doctors said I was fortunate it wasn't worse." Theodore was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I understand your reaction, Mr. Zale. You expected someone whole." Theodore's brow furrowed. "It wasn't the scars themselves, Miss Donahue. It was the deception. A marriage should be built on honesty." "You're right, of course," Priscilla acknowledged. "I should have been forthright from the beginning." As she turned to go, Theodore spoke again, his voice softer. "The stew was good, and the bread, Billy was right pleased. It wasn't much, but it was something." Priscilla offered him a small smile before retreating upstairs. The following evening, Priscilla wore her best dress, a deep blue muslin with a high collar that partially obscured her neck scars. She arranged her hair carefully, using pins to secure the chestnut waves in a style that provided maximum coverage for the left side of her face. Theodore appeared in the doorway of her room as she was making her final adjustments, dressed in clean trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a dark coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "You look very nice," he said, the compliment sounding awkward on his lips. "Thank you," Priscilla replied, surprised. "As do you." He cleared his throat. "I've hitched the wagon. Billy's staying with Mrs. Wilkins in town tonight." The Marshall Ranch was indeed impressive, with a sprawling 2-story house that would have looked at home in a Boston suburb. Gas lamps illuminated the windows, and the sound of piano music drifted through the evening air as Theodore helped Priscilla down from the wagon. Sophia greeted them at the door, resplendent in a fashionable green silk dress that made Priscilla's modest blue muslin seem dowdy by comparison. "Theodore, Miss Donahue, I'm so pleased you could come." She ushered them into a parlor where several other guests were already gathered. Elias Marshall proved to be a robust man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a commanding presence. He shook Theodore's hand vigorously while appraising Priscilla with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the Eastern bride who finally caught our Theodore," he boomed. "Sophia tells me you're from Boston. Banking family, perhaps, or shipping." "My father was a bookkeeper, Mr. Marshall," Priscilla replied honestly. "A respected profession, but not a wealthy one, I'm afraid." If Marshall was disappointed by this revelation, he didn't show it. "Well, Theodore here isn't marrying you for your money, that's certain. Zale's built one of the finest herds in the county with nothing but his own 2 hands." Throughout the evening, Priscilla was acutely aware of the glances directed at her scars, though most of the guests were too polite to stare openly. Only Sophia's younger brother, a brash youth of about 20, asked directly about her accident, earning a sharp rebuke from his father. To Priscilla's surprise, Theodore remained close by her side, steering conversations away from potentially uncomfortable topics, and even placing a protective hand at the small of her back when Sophia's brother became too insistent with his questions. During supper, the conversation turned to the upcoming county fair and cattle auction. "Theodore's Herefords took top prize last year," Marshall informed Priscilla. "Beat my Shorethorns by a narrow margin, though I aim to rectify that this summer." "You'll have to try harder than last year, Elias," Theodore replied with the hint of a smile. "My new bull will sire calves that will make last year's look ordinary by comparison." "Always the competitor," Sophia laughed, placing a familiar hand on Theodore's arm. "Though I think having a wife might soften some of those rough edges." Priscilla watched as Theodore carefully extricated himself from Sophia's touch. "Marriage changes a man, they say." "Speaking of which," Marshall interjected, "when's the wedding to be?" "Sophia mentioned you'd only just arrived, Miss Donahue. Will you be taking your vows in Silver Creek, or are you heading back east for a proper Boston ceremony?" The question hung awkwardly in the air. Priscilla glanced at Theodore, uncertain how to respond without revealing their arrangement. "We haven't finalized our plans," Theodore answered smoothly. "Miss Donahue has only just arrived and there's much to consider." "Well, don't wait too long," Marshall advised. "A woman alone on a ranch with an unmarried man will set tongues wagging, even with young Billy as chaperone." The ride back to the Zale ranch was quiet, the silence broken only by the rhythmic clopping of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels. "Thank you," Priscilla finally said, "for not revealing our situation." Theodore kept his eyes on the road. "No need to embarrass either of us." "You were kind to me tonight," she persisted. "You didn't have to be." He glanced at her then, his expression softening in the moonlight. "The Marshalls can be overwhelming, especially Sophia. She's had her eye on my ranch since her father mentioned combining our properties would make us the largest cattle operation in the county." "She's very beautiful," Priscilla observed carefully. "Yes," Theodore agreed without hesitation, "and she knows it. She's also spoiled, demanding, and has never done a day's real work in her life." Priscilla couldn't help but laugh at his blunt assessment. "Not qualities you value in a wife, I gather." "No," he said simply. "I need a partner, not an ornament." The words hung between them as they approached the darkened ranch house. Theodore helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped back. "I'll see to the horses," he said. "You should get some rest." Priscilla lay awake long into the night, replaying the evening's events. Theodore's protective presence had been unexpected, as was the flutter she'd felt when his hand had rested against her back. It was foolish to develop any attachment she would be leaving in less than 2 days, but she couldn't deny that something had shifted between them. Wednesday dawned clear and bright, and Priscilla found Theodore already at the breakfast table when she came downstairs. "Billy's staying in town another day," he informed her. "Mrs. Wilkins is teaching him his letters." "That's very kind of her," Theodore nodded. "Boy needs an education if he's going to make something of himself." He hesitated, then added, "I thought I'd show you around the ranch today, if you're interested." Surprised by the offer, Priscilla readily agreed. After breakfast, Theodore saddled 2 horses, including a gentle mare for Priscilla. "You ride?" he asked as he helped her mount. "Not since I was a girl," she admitted, "and never astride." "Side saddles are useless out here," Theodore said matter-of-factly. "Just hold the reins steady and follow my lead. Daisy knows the way." He proved to be a patient teacher, guiding her across the rolling pastureland and pointing out landmarks. The beauty of the landscape was breathtaking, towering mountains in the distance, meadows dotted with wildflowers, and clear streams cutting through the grasslands. "It's magnificent," Priscilla breathed as they paused atop a ridge overlooking the valley. "So different from Boston." "This ridge marks the boundary of my property," Theodore explained. "Everything you see from here to that line of cottonwoods belongs to the Zale Ranch." "You've built something wonderful," she said sincerely. "You should be proud." Theodore studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "It's a good life, but a hard one. Winters are brutal, summers are scorching. There's always more work than hands to do it." "Yet you love it," Priscilla observed. "I can hear it in your voice when you speak of the land." He nodded, a rare smile softening his features. "Never wanted anything else, even as a boy in Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith, wanted me to follow in his trade, but I always dreamed of open spaces." As they rode back toward the ranch house, Theodore pointed out a small cemetery on a gentle slope near a stand of aspen trees. "My wife and son are buried there," he said quietly. Priscilla's head snapped toward him in surprise. "Your wife, Sarah? She died in childbirth 6 years ago, along with our son." His voice was steady, but Priscilla could hear the old pain beneath the words. "We'd been married just over a year." "I'm so sorry," Priscilla said softly. "I didn't know." "No reason you should." Theodore guided his horse toward the cemetery. "I visit them every Sunday. Bring wildflowers when they are in bloom." They dismounted, and Priscilla followed Theodore to 2 simple wooden crosses. He stood silently before them, hat in hand, and Priscilla remained respectfully a few paces behind. "Is that why you decided to send for a mail-order bride?" she asked gently when he finally turned away. "After 6 years alone," Theodore replaced his hat, squinting toward the horizon. "A man needs a wife out here, someone to help shoulder the burden." He paused, then added, "And I thought it might be easier with someone who didn't know about Sarah. The women in town, they all remember her, compare every woman to her memory. Was she very beautiful?" "She was kind," Theodore replied simply. That mattered more. As they continued back to the ranch, Priscilla considered his words. Kindness above beauty, it was not a common sentiment among the men she'd known in Boston, where her scars had rendered her invisible to potential suitors. After returning to the ranch house, Theodore disappeared into the barn while Priscilla prepared supper. The domesticity of the day felt strangely comfortable, as if they had fallen into a natural rhythm despite the temporary nature of her stay. Theodore came in as she was setting the table, having washed up at the pump outside. His hair was damp, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms tanned by the sun. "Smells good," he commented, taking his seat at the table. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Theodore cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about our situation," he began carefully. "Your stage leaves tomorrow." Priscilla nodded, her appetite suddenly diminished. "Yes, I appreciate your hospitality these past days." "Where will you go when you return to Boston?" The question caught her off guard. I'm not entirely certain," she admitted. "My room at the boarding house has been let. I suppose I'll need to find another." Theodore studied her across the table, his expression unreadable. "And then?" "I still have some skills as a seamstress," Priscilla said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I can find work, I'm sure." "You could stay," Theodore said abruptly. Priscilla's fork clattered against her plate. "I beg your pardon, here, at the ranch." Theodore's words came slowly, as if he were working out his thoughts as he spoke. "We could proceed with our original arrangement." Priscilla stared at him in disbelief. "But you said because of my scars." "It wasn't the scars," Theodore interrupted, echoing his words from 2 nights before. "It was the deception. But I understand now why you felt you couldn't tell me." He hesitated, then continued. "I've watched you these past days. You're hardworking, resourceful. You've made this house feel more like a home than it has in years." "Mr. Zale, Theodore," he corrected. "If you're considering becoming my wife, you should use my given name." "Theodore," she repeated, her heart racing. "Are you certain? I wouldn't want you to offer out of pity or obligation." His blue eyes met hers directly. "I don't make offers out of pity, Priscilla. I'm a practical man. I need a wife who can handle the demands of ranch life, who can be a mother to Billy, who can stand beside me as a partner. I believe you could be that woman." It wasn't a declaration of love, but Priscilla hadn't expected one. What he offered was respect, partnership, and a home more than she had dared hope for when she'd boarded the train in Boston. "I would like to stay," she said softly. "If you're truly certain." "I am," Theodore replied, a hint of a smile warming his usually stern features. "We can be married by Reverend Phillips in town on Sunday, if that suits you." And just like that, Priscilla's future shifted once again, opening into unexpected possibility. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Mrs. Wilkins helped Priscilla alter her best dress for the ceremony, while Billy bounced between excitement at having Priscilla permanently at the ranch and solemn responsibility, as Theodore had named him official witness. On Saturday evening, Theodore found Priscilla sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space beside her. Priscilla nodded, shifting slightly to make room. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the swing creaking gently as Theodore set it in motion with one boot. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he finally asked. "A little," Priscilla admitted. "It's a significant step for both of us." Theodore nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, I understand if you need time to become comfortable with certain aspects of marriage." A blush heated Priscilla's cheeks as she understood his meaning. "I appreciate your consideration." "I meant what I said about partnership," Theodore continued. "This will be your home too, your ranch. Your opinions will matter." Touched by his earnestness, Priscilla impulsively reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. "Thank you, Theodore. I promise to do my best to be a good wife to you and a mother to Billy." His large, calloused hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining briefly before he released her and stood. "We should turn in early. Tomorrow will be a full day." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Priscilla dressed with care in her altered gown, a simple cream muslin with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. As she arranged her hair before the small mirror, she deliberately left her scars more visible than usual, without the careful arrangement of curls she typically used to hide them. If Theodore was to be her husband, he should see her as she truly was. No more hiding, no more deception. A knock at her door heralded Mrs. Wilkins, who had come early to help with preparations. "My goodness, don't you look lovely?" the older woman exclaimed. "Though you might want to arrange your hair a bit differently on the left." She gestured vaguely toward Priscilla's exposed scars. "No," Priscilla said gently but firmly. "I think it's better this way." Mrs. Wilkins studied her for a moment, then smiled with understanding. "You're right, of course. A marriage should start with honesty." The ceremony at Silver Creek's small white church was brief but meaningful. Reverend Philip spoke eloquently about the sacred nature of marriage, the binding together of two lives in partnership before God. Theodore stood tall beside Priscilla, his voice steady as he repeated his vows. When it came time to exchange rings, he produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared, beaming at them. "Mr. Zale, you may kiss your bride." Priscilla tensed slightly, suddenly aware that this would be their first physical contact beyond handshakes and the brief, impersonal touch of his hand at her waist. Would he hesitate, turn her unscarred side toward him for the kiss? Theodore's blue eyes met hers, steady and certain, as he gently cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs lightly brushing both her smooth skin and her scarred flesh without distinction. Then he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that was gentle but unhesitating, a promise sealed with remarkable tenderness from a man of so few words. When they parted, Priscilla was surprised to see warmth in Theodore's usually reserved expression. Before she could ponder it further, Billy whooped with delight, breaking the solemn atmosphere and causing several of the handful of witnesses to laugh. A small reception followed at the town hotel, where Mrs. Wilkins had arranged for refreshments. Most of Silver Creek's residents came to wish them well, including several of Theodore's fellow ranchers and their families. Priscilla noted that Sophia Marshall and her father were conspicuously absent. As the afternoon waned, Theodore loaded Billy and their wedding gifts into the wagon for the journey home. Several townsfolk followed on horseback, maintaining the tradition of chivalry, a boisterous escort for the newlyweds complete with banging pots and pans, shouted advice, and bawdy jokes that made Priscilla blush to her hairline. The revelers finally departed as dusk settled over the ranch, leaving the newlyweds standing somewhat awkwardly on the porch of what was now their shared home. Billy had already disappeared inside, tired from the excitement of the day. "Well, Mrs. Zale," Theodore said, the name still sounding new on his tongue, "shall we go in?" Priscilla nodded, suddenly nervous about the night ahead. Theodore seemed to sense her apprehension as he followed her inside. "I'll check on the stock," he said, moving toward the door again. "Take your time settling in." Grateful for his understanding, Priscilla helped Billy prepare for bed, then retreated to what would now be her and Theodore's bedroom. She changed into her nightgown, a modest white cotton garment with long sleeves and a high neck, and sat at the small dressing table to brush out her hair. When Theodore finally entered, he had clearly washed up at the pump outside. His hair was damp, his face freshly shaved. He hesitated in the doorway, seeming unsure of his welcome in what had previously been his private domain. "I can sleep in the spare room if you prefer," he offered quietly. Priscilla shook her head, finding courage in his consideration. "That won't be necessary. We are married now." Theodore nodded, moving to the opposite side of the bed and beginning to unbutton his shirt with his back to her. Priscilla averted her eyes, allowing him privacy as he changed into sleep clothes. The mattress dipped as he slid beneath the covers beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. For several long minutes, they lay in silence, the only sounds the distant howl of a coyote and the soft rhythm of their breathing. "Priscilla," Theodore finally said, his deep voice gentle in the darkness. "I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, there's no rush for certain aspects of marriage." Understanding his meaning, Priscilla felt a rush of both relief and something like disappointment. "Thank you for your consideration," she whispered. He reached across the space between them, finding her hand and squeezing it briefly before releasing it. "Good night, Mrs. Zale." "Good night, husband," she replied, testing the word that still felt foreign on her tongue. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Theodore rose before dawn to tend to the cattle, while Priscilla prepared breakfast and packed lunches for him and Billy. When they returned in the evening, dinner would be waiting, the house clean and organized in a way it hadn't been even under Mrs. Wilkins' care. Priscilla discovered that she enjoyed ranch life more than she'd anticipated. The open spaces soothed something in her that had felt confined in Boston's narrow streets. She planted a vegetable garden, learned to make cheese from the milk of Theodore's small dairy herd, and even took over some of the chicken and pig care from Billy, freeing the boy to learn more about cattle management from Theodore. Their nights remained chaste, Theodore maintaining the respectful distance he'd established on their wedding night. While Priscilla appreciated his consideration, as the weeks passed, she found herself increasingly aware of him as a man, the strength in his shoulders as he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands when he helped deliver a calf, the rare smile that transformed his serious face when Billy mastered a new skill. One evening in late July, nearly a month after their wedding, a sudden thunderstorm swept across the plains. Theodore and Billy had been checking fence lines in the far pasture and returned drenched and chilled to the bone. "Get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death," Priscilla ordered, ushering them inside. She stoked the fire while Theodore helped Billy change, then brought them both steaming cups of coffee laced with honey. "You're soaked through yourself," Theodore observed as Priscilla moved about the kitchen preparing supper, her skirts heavy with rainwater from her brief time in the yard gathering the washing from the line. "I'll change after supper," she assured him, but a violent sneeze betrayed her. After the meal, Theodore insisted she retire early while he and Billy cleaned up. "You've been working too hard," he said firmly. "The last thing we need is for you to fall ill." Too tired to argue, Priscilla retreated to their bedroom, changing into her warmest nightgown before sliding beneath the quilts. Despite the summer heat, she couldn't seem to get warm, a chill settling into her bones as she drifted into uneasy sleep. She woke sometime in the night, shivering violently despite the blankets piled over her. Theodore's side of the bed was empty, not unusual, as he often rose in the night to check on a pregnant mare or a sickly calf. Priscilla curled into a tight ball, trying to generate warmth as her teeth chattered. The bedroom door opened, and Theodore entered carrying a mug of something steaming. "You're awake," he observed, setting the mug on the bedside table and pressing his hand to her forehead. His palm felt blessedly cool against her burning skin. "You've got a fever." "I'm freezing," she managed between chattering teeth. "That's the fever talking," Theodore said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Can you sit up? I've made you some willow bark tea. It will help with the fever." He supported her as she struggled to a sitting position, then held the mug to her lips. The tea was bitter, but Priscilla sipped obediently, desperate for relief from the alternating waves of heat and cold washing over her. "I'm sorry," she whispered as he set the empty mug aside. "I don't mean to be a burden." "Nonsense," Theodore said firmly. "Everyone falls ill occasionally, even stubborn ranchers. She tried to smile at his attempt at humor, but was seized by another bout of violent shivering. Without hesitation, Theodore slid into bed beside her and pulled her against his chest, his arms encircling her trembling form. "Body heat is the best remedy for chills," he explained, his voice rumbling against her ear where it pressed against his chest. "Rest now." Priscilla should have felt embarrassed by the unprecedented intimacy, but the comfort of his solid warmth overrode any such concerns. She allowed herself to relax against him, her shivering gradually subsiding as sleep claimed her once more. When she woke the next morning, her fever had broken, leaving her weak but clear-headed. Theodore was gone, but the impression of his body remained on the mattress beside her, and the memory of his arms around her lingered like a pleasant dream. She was sitting up in bed, sipping more willow bark tea when Theodore entered with a tray of breakfast. "You're looking better," he observed, setting the tray across her lap. "How do you feel?" "Much improved," Priscilla assured him. "Thank you for taking care of me last night." A faint flush colored Theodore's tanned cheeks. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing to me," she said softly, gathering her courage. "Theodore, may I ask you something?" He nodded, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "You find me repulsive because of my scars." The question had been building for weeks, ever since their wedding night when he'd established such careful distance between them. Theodore's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Repulsive? No, Priscilla, never that." "Then why haven't you?" She faltered, unable to phrase the delicate question properly. Understanding dawned in his expression. "I didn't want to pressure you," he explained, his voice gruff with emotion. "After what you told me about Boston, how men turned away from you because of your scars. I wanted you to feel safe here, to know that I married you for your companionship, your help with the ranch, that the rest could wait until you were ready." Tears sprang to Priscilla's eyes at his unexpected thoughtfulness. "I've been ready for some time, Theodore. I just wasn't sure if you—" He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on the scarred side of her face. "Your scars are part of you," he said simply. "They show your courage, your survival. How could I find that repulsive?" Then, with a tenderness that made her heart swell, Theodore leaned forward and pressed his lips to the twisted flesh at her temple, then to the puckered skin along her jawline, and finally to the corner of her mouth where the scar tissue pulled slightly. "Every one of them tells me something about the woman I married," he murmured against her skin. "The woman who's becoming far more to me than just a practical partnership." Priscilla's breath caught at the implication of his words. "Theodore." His blue eyes met hers, vulnerability evident in their depths. "I didn't expect to feel this way again after Sarah, but you've brought something back to this house to me that I thought was gone forever." She reached up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the line of his beard. "I never expected to find someone who could see past my scars to the woman beneath." "I see you, Priscilla," Theodore said simply, before lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that held none of the restraint of their wedding day. The weeks that followed were a revelation for both of them. Their marriage, begun as a practical arrangement, blossomed into something neither had dared hope for: a deep connection that encompassed not only physical passion, but also genuine affection and understanding. By early autumn, Priscilla had fully settled into her role as Mrs. Theodore Zale. She managed the household with quiet efficiency, introduced several improvements to the ranch's operations based on articles she'd read in Theodore's farming journals, and formed a strong bond with Billy, whose nightmares about the Cheyenne raid had largely subsided under her gentle care. The county fair in late September brought excitement to Silver Creek. Theodore's Hereford bull took top prize, as he'd predicted, and Billy won a blue ribbon for a calf he'd raised himself. Priscilla, entered her preserves in the domestic arts competition, and was pleasantly surprised when her blackberry jam was awarded second place. Not bad for a city girl, Theodore teased as they loaded their prizes into the wagon for the journey home. I'm hardly a city girl anymore, Priscilla replied with a smile, gesturing to her practical cotton dress and sturdy boots, so different from the fashionable attire she'd arrived in just months before. As they moved through the fairgrounds, Priscilla noticed Sophia Marshall watching them from beneath a parasol, her beautiful face tight with what might have been envy as Theodore's arm settled comfortably around his wife's waist. Miss Marshall doesn't look pleased about your bull beating her father's again, Priscilla observed quietly. Theodore glanced in Sophia's direction, then shrugged. Sophia doesn't like losing, whether it's a cattle competition or a marriage prospect. He pulled Priscilla closer, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. But I'd say I got the better end of that particular bargain. The warm glow of his words carried Priscilla through the autumn months as they prepared the ranch for winter. Theodore had warned her about the harshness of Colorado winters, but nothing could have prepared her for the blizzard that struck 2 days before Christmas, howling out of the north with a ferocity that shook the sturdy log walls of their home. Theodore and Billy had barely managed to get the livestock into the barn and shelters before the full force of the storm hit. For 3 days, they were confined to the house, venturing out only to tend to the animals in the nearby barn via a rope line Theodore had strung to prevent them from getting lost in the blinding snow. On Christmas Eve, the storm finally abated, leaving behind drifts taller than a man and a crystalline silence broken only by the occasional crack of a tree branch giving way under its burden of snow. It's beautiful, Priscilla breathed, staring out the window at the transformed landscape. Like a painting. Beautiful but deadly, Theodore cautioned as he pulled on his heavy coat. I need to check the cattle in the north shelter. Some of the pregnant heifers are close to their time. You can't go alone, Priscilla protested. What if another squall blows in? I'll be fine, Theodore assured her, but the worry in his eyes belied his confident words. Just keep the fire going and look after Billy. The boy in question looked up from where he was whittling a piece of wood beside the hearth. I can help with the cattle, Mr. Zale. I'm old enough. Theodore considered for a moment, then nodded. An extra pair of hands would be useful. Bundle up warm, though. It's bitter out there. As they prepared to leave, Theodore pulled Priscilla aside, pressing something into her hand. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but... He shrugged, suddenly awkward. Merry Christmas, wife. Priscilla opened her palm to find a delicate silver locket. When she clicked it open, she found a tiny Dagria type of Theodore on one side and on the other a small lock of dark hair. Billy's? She asked, touched by the sentiment. Theodore nodded. So you'll always have both of us with you, even when we're out working the range. Tears pricked at Priscilla's eyes as she fastened the locket around her neck. It's perfect, thank you. She watched from the window as Theodore and Billy made their way through the snow toward the north pasture, their figures growing smaller until they disappeared into the white landscape. Hours passed with no sign of their return. As dusk approached, Priscilla's worry increased. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the setting sun, and the wind was beginning to pick up again, stirring the loose snow into ghostly eddies. Just as she was considering attempting to follow their tracks, the door burst open, admitting a blast of frigid air along with Theodore carrying Billy in his arms. What happened? Priscilla gasped, rushing forward. Fell through some ice at the creek, Theodore explained tersely, his face tight with concern. The boys half frozen. Working together, they stripped Billy of his wet clothes and wrapped him in warmed blankets before the fire. The boy's lips were blue, his teeth chattering violently as Priscilla rubbed his feet and hands to restore circulation. "The pregnant heifer?" she asked Theodore, who was stoking the fire to a roaring blaze. "Lost her and the calf," he replied grimly. "Nothing to be done. I was more concerned with getting Billy home before he froze to death." Gradually, color returned to Billy's face as he sipped the hot broth Priscilla prepared. "I'm sorry, Mr. Zale," he stammered. "I shouldn't have gone so close to the sea creek." "You're all right, that's what matters," Theodore assured him, his gruff voice gentler than usual. "Cattle can be replaced, you can't." After getting Billy settled in bed with hot bricks wrapped in flannel to warm his feet, Priscilla returned to the kitchen to find Theodore slumped at the table, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You should change out of those wet clothes too," she urged, noticing the dampness of his trousers where he'd waded into the icy creek to pull Billy out. "In a minute," he murmured, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. "I nearly lost him today, Priscilla. If I'd been a few minutes later." "But you weren't," she reminded him, kneeling beside his chair and taking his cold hands in hers. "You saved him. He's safe and warm in his bed." Theodore's blue eyes focused on her face, tracing the familiar pattern of her scars with a tenderness that still had the power to make her breath catch. "What would I do without you?" he asked softly. "You've become the heart of this place." Priscilla smiled, rising to press a kiss to his forehead. "You'll never have to find out," she promised. "Now, let's get you warmed up before you catch your death, just like you warned me about last summer." Later that night, as they lay entwined in the warmth of their bed, Theodore's fingers traced idle patterns on Priscilla's bare shoulder. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice soft in the darkness. "Something I've been waiting to be certain of before I mentioned it." Theodore propped himself up on one elbow, his expression curious in the dim light from the banked fire. "What is it?" Priscilla took his hand and guided it to her still flat abdomen. "I believe we'll be adding to our family come summer." For a moment, Theodore remained completely still, his palm warm against her stomach. Then, to her surprise, she saw a gleam of moisture in his eyes as he bent to kiss her with a reverence that took her breath away. "A baby," he whispered against her lips. "Our baby. Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction had already given her the answer. "More than I can say," Theodore replied, gathering her closer. "When I lost Sarah and our son, I never thought I'd have this chance again." Priscilla rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When I left Boston, I hoped only for security, perhaps respect from a husband who could look past my scars. I never dreamed I would find love again." "Is that what we've found, Priscilla? Love?" Theodore's voice held a vulnerability she rarely heard from him. She raised her head to meet his gaze directly. "Yes, Theodore. That's exactly what we've found." His answering smile was all the confirmation she needed. The winter passed slowly, the harshness of the Colorado elements tempered by the warmth within the Zale home. By spring, Priscilla's condition was evident, her slender figure softening with the new life growing within her. Theodore became even more protective, insisting she rest frequently and assigning Billy to help with the more strenuous household chores. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Priscilla protested one afternoon as Theodore forbade her from helping with the spring planting. "Humor me," he requested, his hand gently cradling her rounded belly. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you or the baby." Understanding the fear behind his concern, the memory of Sarah's death in childbirth, Priscilla relented, though she insisted on continuing with her normal household duties. As her time grew nearer, Theodore arranged for a midwife from town to stay at the ranch. Mrs. Peterson was a no-nonsense woman with decades of experience bringing new life into the world. "The babe is positioned well," she assured Priscilla after an examination in early July. "Strong heartbeat, too. You should have an easier time of it than some." Despite these reassurances, Theodore grew increasingly anxious as the expected date approached. He rarely ventured far from the house, delegating ranch work to hired hands so he could remain close by. On a sweltering afternoon in late July, Priscilla was shelling peas on the porch when the first pain gripped her. She gasped, one hand flying to her distended abdomen. "Priscilla!" Theodore was at her side instantly, having been mending tack nearby. "Is it time?" She nodded, unable to speak as another contraction washed over her. Theodore swept her into his arms with surprising gentleness, carrying her upstairs to their bedroom where Mrs. Peterson was already preparing her supplies. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Throughout the night, Theodore refused to leave Priscilla's side despite the midwife's assertion that men had no place in the birthing room. "My place is with my wife," he stated firmly, holding Priscilla's hand and wiping her brow as she worked to bring their child into the world. As dawn broke over the eastern plains, Priscilla gave a final push, and their daughter slipped into Mrs. Peterson's waiting hands. The baby's indignant wail filled the room, bringing tears to both parents' eyes. "A girl," the midwife announced, cleaning the infant before placing her in Priscilla's arms. Healthy as can be, Priscilla gazed down at the tiny face, perfect and unmarked, with a tuft of dark hair like her father's. "She's beautiful," she whispered, then looked up at Theodore, whose expression of wonder matched her own. "What shall we name her?" he asked, one finger gently stroking the baby's velvet cheek. Priscilla considered for a moment. "How about Sarah, after your first wife?" Theodore's eyes widened in surprise. "You wouldn't mind. She was important to you," Priscilla said simply. "And without her you wouldn't be the man I fell in love with. It seems fitting to honor her memory." Theodore leaned down to kiss her, his lips gentle against hers. "Sarah it is, then." Sarah Priscilla Zale. Billy was permitted to enter once Priscilla had been cleaned up and was resting comfortably with the baby. The boy approached the bed cautiously, his eyes huge as he stared at the tiny bundle in Priscilla's arms. "Would you like to hold your sister, Billy?" Priscilla offered. He nodded solemnly, and Theodore showed him how to support the baby's head as Priscilla transferred the infant to his arms. "She's so little," Billy marveled, a smile spreading across his face as Sarah's tiny fingers curled around one of his. "She'll grow," Theodore assured him, his hand resting proudly on the boy's shoulder. "And she'll need her big brother to look out for her." The scene before her, Theodore standing proud beside Billy, who held baby Sarah with such careful attention, filled Priscilla's heart to overflowing. This was her family, pieced together from loss and loneliness into something beautiful and whole. As the summer waned into autumn, Priscilla recovered her strength. Baby Sarah thrived, growing plumper by the day, with Theodore's blue eyes and what promised to be Priscilla's heart-shaped face. Billy proved to be a devoted older brother, eagerly helping with the baby whenever permitted. One crisp October evening, Priscilla sat on the porch swing nursing Sarah while Theodore and Billy finished the evening chores. The setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, turning the distant mountains to purple shadows against the flame-colored sky. Theodore joined her, settling onto the swing with a contented sigh. "Billy's growing into a fine hand," he remarked. "Won't be long before he's ready to take on more responsibility." "He's a good boy," Priscilla agreed, shifting Sarah to her shoulder to burp her. "You've raised him well." "We've raised him," Theodore corrected, his arm sliding around her shoulders, "just as we'll raise Sarah together." Priscilla leaned into his embrace, savoring the peaceful moment. "Did you ever imagine this, Theodore, when you sent away for a mail-order bride?" he chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. "Can't say that I did. I was hoping for a practical arrangement, someone to cook and clean and maybe provide some companionship." His finger traced the outline of her scars in a familiar, loving gesture. "I never expected to find my heart again." "Nor I," Priscilla admitted, lifting her face for his kiss. "It seems we were both fortunate in our practicality." As dusk deepened into night, they remained on the porch, the baby sleeping peacefully in Priscilla's arms, their conversation flowing easily between plans for the ranch and dreams for their children's futures. The scars that had once defined Priscilla's life had become merely a part of her story, a story that now included love, family, and a home where she was valued not despite her imperfections, but as a complete woman, scars and all. In the years that followed, the Zale Ranch prospered. Theodore's careful breeding program produced cattle sought after throughout the territory, while Priscilla's shrewd management of the household finances allowed them to expand their holdings. Billy grew into a capable young man who eventually took over day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Theodore more time with Priscilla and their growing family, as Sarah was joined by two brothers in the years that followed. Visitors to the Zale Ranch often remarked on the obvious affection between the rancher and his scarred wife. Few knew the story of their unconventional beginning, how a desperate woman had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, only to face rejection when her scars were revealed. Fewer still understood the journey that had brought them from practical arrangement to deep and abiding love. But Theodore and Priscilla knew, and in the privacy of their bedroom each night, he would still trace the path of her scars with reverent fingers before kissing each one, a silent reminder of the courage and resilience that had first earned his respect, and eventually his heart.